The marker froze in Catherine Brennan's hand. 200 pairs of eyes watched a 7-year-old girl walk to the front of Riverside Elementary's auditorium, her small finger pointing at the whiteboard where the CEO had just written a complex AI algorithm. "Excuse me, Miss Brennan," Ruby Hayes said, her voice clear as a bell. "There's a mistake right here." The room held its breath. Catherine stared at the formula she'd presented 100 times, the foundation of her $50 million company, now being corrected by a child in a faded pink dress. "Who taught you this?" Catherine's voice barely concealed her shock. Ruby turned, her hand rising to point toward the back of the auditorium, past the parents in business suits, past the teachers whispering behind their hands, all the way to the corner where a man stood alone in a gray custodial uniform, his shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear into the shadows. "My daddy taught me," Ruby said with a smile that didn't understand the earthquake she'd just triggered. "He cleans your building." What happened next would shatter everything Catherine thought she knew about success, betrayal, and the invisible man who'd been mopping her floors for 3 years. Catherine Brennan had built next-gen dynamics from nothing. Or so she thought. The algorithm that powered her artificial intelligence platform had cost her $5 million 3 years ago, purchased from a brilliant researcher named Dr. Julian Crawford, who now served as her chief technology officer. Julian had assured her the work was his own, the result of years of solitary genius at Johns Hopkins University. She'd never thought to question it. Why would she? The man had credentials, references, and a presentation so polished it could cut glass. But now, standing in front of 200 elementary school students on career day, Catherine felt the ground shift beneath her expensive heels. The little girl had corrected her formula with the confidence of someone who understood not just the math, but the soul behind it. And she'd pointed to a janitor, a man whose name Catherine couldn't recall ever learning, despite seeing him push his cart through her building's hallways for 3 years, always after hours, always invisible. Garrett Hayes stood in the back corner of the auditorium, his face drained of color. He wore the gray uniform of NextGen's custodial staff, the company logo stitched above his heart in navy blue thread. His hands hung at his sides, fingers twitching as if remembering the feel of chalk on a blackboard, of markers on whiteboards, of writing equations that could change the world. For 3 years, he'd cleaned the floors where his stolen work had built an empire. For 3 years, he'd bitten his tongue and kept his head down. And now, his daughter, his brilliant, innocent Ruby, had just torn open a wound he'd tried so hard to let scar over. The auditorium erupted in whispers. Parents leaned toward each other, eyebrows raised. Teachers exchanged glances. And in the front row, sitting next to Ruby's empty seat, 8-year-old Harper Brennan looked at her mother with wide eyes. Harper had been in the same class as Ruby all year, but had never spoken to her. The quiet girl with the second-hand clothes and the packed lunches in paper bags. Now Harper watched Ruby walk back to her seat with something like awe on her face. Maybe, Harper thought, being smart mattered more than having the right shoes. Catherine cleared her throat, attempting to regain control of the room. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're absolutely correct." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She corrected the formula on the board, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote. The marker squeaked against the whiteboard, too loud in the sudden silence. "This is exactly why we encourage curiosity in young minds. Well done." The words tasted like ash. She finished her presentation on autopilot, barely hearing her own voice, her mind racing through implications she didn't want to face. When the event ended, Catherine gathered her materials with mechanical precision. Parents filed out, some pausing to thank her, others casting curious glances toward the back where Garrett Hayes had already disappeared. She needed to leave, needed to get back to her office, needed to think. But as she reached the parking lot, she saw him. Garrett stood beside a 15-year-old sedan, with rust eating at the wheel wells, helping Ruby into a booster seat that had seen better days. The tenderness in his movements, the way he checked her seatbelt twice, the gentle kiss he pressed to her forehead. It spoke of a love so fierce it made Catherine's chest ache. She approached before she could talk herself out of it. "Mr. Hayes." Her voice came out sharper than intended. Garrett turned, his expression carefully blank. Up close she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He looked tired. Bone tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying weight no one else could see. "Miss Brennan." His voice was quiet, respectful, empty of emotion. The voice of someone who'd learned to make himself small. "We need to talk. My office, Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Catherine kept her tone professional. CEO to employee, even as her mind screamed questions she couldn't ask here. Not now. Not in a school parking lot with his daughter watching. Garrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Mom." No argument, no explanation, just acceptance. He turned back to Ruby, who was watching them through the car window with curious eyes. Catherine walked away, her heels clicking against the asphalt, each step feeling like she was walking toward something she couldn't take back. That weekend, Catherine barely slept. She sat in her home office, a converted study with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Baltimore's harbor, and did what she should have done 3 years ago. She investigated. Garrett Hayes. She pulled his employment file first. Hired in November 2022 as a night custodial worker. Previous employment listed as Johns Hopkins University, terminated. Education? PhD in Applied Mathematics from MIT. Published works? 47 peer-reviewed papers before 2022. Then nothing. It was the nothing that caught her attention. Brilliant minds didn't just stop. She called in a favor from a private investigator she'd used for background checks on potential board members. By Sunday evening, she had a file 3 inches thick. And what she read made her stomach turn. June 2022, Garrett Hayes preparing to publish groundbreaking research on AI optimization algorithms. July 2022, allegations of theft, led by investigation from the colleague Dr. Julian Crawford. August 2022, wife Diana Hayes hospitalized with brain tumor recurrence. September 2022, Diana Hayes deceased. Garrett Hayes terminated from Johns Hopkins, blacklisted from academic community. Catherine sat back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. Julian Crawford, her CTO, the man who'd sold her the algorithm for $5 million, the man who'd led the investigation that destroyed Garrett Hayes. The pieces fit together with sickening clarity. She'd built her empire on stolen genius, and the man who'd been robbed swept her floors every night. The irony was so bitter she could taste it. Monday morning arrived with grey skies threatening rain. Catherine sat behind her desk at 7:30, watching the city wake up through her 15th floor windows. At precisely 8 o'clock, her assistant knocked. "Mr. Hayes is here." Catherine straightened her spine. "Send him in, alone." She'd purposely not involved legal or HR. Not yet. Not until she understood what she was dealing with. The door opened, and Garrett stepped inside, still wearing his grey uniform. He stood just inside the doorway, hands clasped in front of him, eyes downcast. Every inch of his posture screamed defeat. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes." Catherine gestured to the chair across from her desk. Garrett hesitated, then sat on the edge of the seat, as if ready to bolt. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to tell me the truth." She paused, weighing her words. "That formula Ruby corrected on Friday, where did she learn it?" Garrett's hands tightened on his knees. "I taught her, at home. We do math problems before bed instead of bedtime stories." "Math problems." Catherine leaned forward. "Mr. Hayes." "Garrett, That wasn't a basic formula. That was a level 4 optimization sequence that only 5 people in my company should know. And according to my records, you've been my night janitor for 3 years. So I'll ask again. Where did your 7-year-old daughter learn proprietary AI algorithms? The air between them crackled with tension. Garrett's jaw worked, and for a moment Catherine thought he might lie, might give her some story she could pretend to believe. Instead, he looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Pain. Rage. And underneath it all, a resignation so deep it was almost peaceful. She learned it from me, Garrett said quietly, because I created it. 5 years ago, before Julian Crawford stole it, framed me for theft, and sold it to you while my wife was dying. The words hung in the air like smoke. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. That's a serious accusation. Her voice came out weaker than she intended. It's the truth. Garrett's voice remained steady, factual, as if he were discussing the weather. June 2022. I'd spent 5 years developing an AI learning optimization algorithm. Julian was my research partner, contributed maybe 10% of the work. The night before I was set to submit for publication, all my data vanished. 2 days later, Julian discovered emails from my account selling research to competitors, emails I never sent, bank transfers to accounts I never opened. Catherine's hands gripped the edge of her desk. The investigation was led by Julian, Garrett interrupted softly. He found all the evidence. He presented it all. And when Johns Hopkins couldn't prove criminal intent because it wouldn't hold up in court, they simply fired me for violation of ethics policies, blacklisted me, made sure no one would ever hire me again. He paused, and his voice roughened. My wife Diana, she had beaten brain cancer 3 years earlier. The stress of the scandal made it come back. Aggressive. Fast. She died thinking I was a criminal. Our last conversation, she asked me if I'd really done it. I never got to prove to her that I hadn't. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Catherine felt sick. Why didn't you fight? Sue? Go public? Garrett laughed, a broken sound without humor. With what? No evidence? No money for lawyers, no credibility, and Ruby, she'd just lost her mother. I couldn't drag her through a public battle I was guaranteed to lose, so I disappeared. Took the only job I could get with a record like mine. Night shift custodial. At least I could feed my daughter. He stood, movements careful, controlled. You wanted the truth. There it is. Now if you'll excuse me, I have floors to clean. Wait. Catherine stood as well. Garrett, I didn't know. If what you're saying is true... It is true. His voice cut through hers. And Miss Brennan? Julian is still here, your chief technology officer, the man you trust. He's been here for 3 years, watching me push a mop, knowing exactly who I am, knowing what he did. And he's been silent because if I'm just the janitor, no one will ever believe me over him. With that, Garrett walked out, leaving Catherine alone with the wreckage of everything she thought she'd built. She waited until his footsteps fade, then reached for her phone. But before she could dial, her office door opened without a knock. Julian Crawford strode in, his handsome face arranged in an expression of concern. Catherine, I heard you met with the janitor. I need to warn you about something. His voice was smooth, practiced. Garrett Hayes, he's manipulative, dangerous. 3 years ago at Johns Hopkins, he nearly destroyed our entire department with his schemes. Catherine set her phone down slowly. Tell me, Julian, why didn't you mention when we hired him that he used to be your colleague? Julian's expression flickered for just a moment. I didn't recognize him at first. He'd changed. And honestly, I felt sorry for him. Thought giving him a job, even in custodial, was a kindness. He moved closer to her desk. But after what happened Friday with his daughter, I'm worried. He's using that little girl to manipulate you. It's classic sociopath behavior. Use a child's innocence as a weapon. Interesting theory. Catherine kept her voice neutral. Julian, can you walk me through the algorithm acquisition again? The one we purchased in 2022. I'm preparing a presentation for the board. She watched his face carefully. Of course. Julian's confidence never wavered. I developed it over 6 years at Johns Hopkins. It's based on neural network optimization with polynomial interpolation instead of linear regression. Catherine finished. Fascinating, because that specific approach isn't in any of your published papers before 2022, but it is in Garrett Hayes' work from 2019. The air in the room changed. Julian's smile tightened at the corners. Catherine, whatever that man told you, he told me you stole his research. Framed him. Sold it to me for $5 million while his wife was dying of cancer. Catherine's voice remained calm, but her eyes were hard. He told me you destroyed his life, and I've spent the weekend investigating. Do you want to know what I found? Julian's jaw clenched. You can't trust the word of a disgraced academic over mine. I have credentials, reputation. He has nothing. He has a 7-year-old daughter who understands algorithms that my entire engineering team struggles with. Catherine said quietly. He has 47 published papers that show a mind capable of exactly the kind of breakthrough you claim to have made. And he has something you don't, Julian. He has the truth. She pulled up her computer screen. I have bank records showing you received $5 million from NextGen the same month Garrett was fired. I have digital forensics showing the evidence against Garrett was planted from a coffee shop near your apartment. I have testimony from colleagues who say you resented Garrett's brilliance. And I have my own eyes, Julian. I've seen you work for 3 years. You're good, but you're not genius level. Garrett Hayes is. Julian's mask cracked. For a moment, rage flashed across his face, raw and ugly. Then he laughed, cold and sharp. You can't prove anything. I'll tie you up in litigation for years. I'll destroy this company before I let you destroy me. Catherine pressed a button on her desk. The door opened, and 2 security guards entered, followed by a police detective. Dr. Crawford, the detective said, we have some questions about fraud, intellectual property theft, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. As they led Julian away, his protests echoing down the hallway, his threats growing more desperate, Catherine sat down heavily. She'd just blown up her own company. The algorithm was stolen. The CTO was a fraud. The board would crucify her. But as she stared at the city below, she realized she didn't care. She'd built an empire on a lie, and the only way forward was to burn it down and rebuild it right, even if it cost her everything. 3 hours later, Catherine stood outside a small apartment building in a neighborhood where the paint peeled and the sidewalks cracked. She'd gotten the address from HR. 2nd floor, apartment C. She climbed the stairs, her designer heels clicking against worn concrete. At the door, she hesitated. What did you say to a man whose life you'd inadvertently helped destroy? How did you apologize for profiting from his pain? She knocked anyway. Garrett opened the door, surprise flashing across his face before settling back into careful neutrality. Behind him, Catherine could see a small living room, a couch with patches, a coffee table covered in math textbooks and colored pencils, and Ruby sitting on the floor doing homework. Miss Brennan? Garrett's voice held a question. I arrested Julian an hour ago, Catherine said without preamble. Fraud, theft, conspiracy. He's going to prison. And I wanted you to know. Her voice caught. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. I should have investigated before I bought that algorithm. I should have questioned. I built my company on your stolen work, and you've been cleaning my floors while I profited from your pain. Garrett stared at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, It wasn't your fault. You didn't know. But there was no warmth in his voice, just exhaustion. Catherine shook her head. Not knowing doesn't absolve me. Garrett, I want to make this right. NextGen will return full rights to the algorithm to you. You'll receive royalties for every license we've sold. Johns Hopkins is already preparing to reinstate you with back pay, and I want to offer you a position. Chief Innovation Officer. Full equity. You'd be creating, teaching, leading, using your gift the way it was meant to be used. No. The word was quiet but final. Catherine blinked. No? Garrett's expression softened slightly. Miss Brennan, 3 years ago I learned something. Brilliance means nothing if you sacrifice the people you love for it. I lost Diana chasing research and recognition. I won't lose Ruby, too. He glanced back at his daughter, who was watching them with curious eyes. I appreciate the offer, but I'm staying where I am. Night shift custodial. It lets me take Ruby to school, pick her up, be there for dinner and homework and bedtime. No amount of money or prestige is worth more than that. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. This man, who'd lost everything, who'd been given a chance to reclaim his former glory, was choosing a mop and bucket because it meant being present for his child. It was the most profound thing she'd ever witnessed. What if, she said slowly, we could do both? What if you could teach, create, innovate, but on your terms? Part-time, flexible hours, never during Ruby's time. Garrett studied her face, searching for deception, for the catch. Why would you do that? Because my daughter Harper came home Friday and said she wished I could see her the way you see Ruby. Catherine's voice broke. Because I've spent 8 years building a company, and I didn't know my daughter's favorite color was lavender until yesterday. Because you're right. Brilliance without balance is just another kind of failure. And maybe we could help each other learn how to do both. She paused. I need someone who understands that people matter more than patents. And I think Ruby and Harper could use knowing that their parents are trying to be better. Garrett looked back at Ruby, who'd abandoned her homework to stand beside him. The little girl looked up at her father with complete trust. Daddy, can I say something? Ruby asked. Garrett nodded. Ruby turned to Catherine. My mummy wrote in her diary before she died. She said Daddy built the algorithm thinking of kids like me. He wanted to help children learn. That was his dream. Maybe Miss Catherine could help make that dream real, and you could teach me and Harper together? Catherine knelt down to Ruby's eye level. Your mother sounds like she was very wise. She looked up at Garrett. What if we created something new? Not just returning what was stolen, but building something better. A foundation. Free STEM education for underprivileged kids, led by you. We could call it the Diana Hayes Learning Initiative. She saw something crack in Garrett's armor. His eyes reddened, but he didn't look away. Diana would have liked that, he said softly. Then, after a long pause, all right, but I pick Ruby up at 3:15 every day. Non-negotiable. Deal, Catherine said. I have the same rule with Harper now. They shook hands, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness. That would take time. Not even trust yet. But perhaps the beginning of understanding. Two people who'd both lost their way, trying to find a path forward. And two little girls who might just show them how. The next 3 months moved like a whirlwind. Catherine held a press conference that sent shockwaves through the tech industry. She admitted NextGen had unknowingly built its foundation on stolen research. She transferred full intellectual property rights back to Garrett Hayes and announced the company would pay restitution. The board was furious. 3 members resigned. Stock prices tumbled. But Catherine stood firm. Some things mattered more than quarterly earnings. Julian Crawford faced criminal charges. The evidence was overwhelming once investigators started digging. Fraud, forgery, intellectual property theft. He'd face 5 to 10 years. At his arraignment, he'd looked at Catherine with pure hatred. "You destroyed me for a janitor," he'd spat. Catherine had looked him in the eye and said, "No, you destroyed yourself when you stole from a good man. I'm just making sure the world knows it." Johns Hopkins issued a formal apology to Garrett and offered full reinstatement with tenure. He'd declined. Instead, he'd accepted Catherine's offer. Part-time Chief Innovation Officer at NextGen and full-time Director of the Diana Hayes Learning Initiative. The foundation launched with a $50 million endowment. Every Saturday, 30 kids gathered in a converted NextGen office space to learn math, coding, and science. For free. And Garrett taught them with a patience and passion that made Catherine's chest ache. Harper started attending the Saturday program too, even though she didn't need it financially. She wanted to learn from Mr. Hayes, she said, and she wanted to sit next to Ruby. The two girls had become inseparable. Catherine would drop Harper off at 8 and stay to observe. She'd watch her daughter's face light up when Garrett explained a concept, watch Harper and Ruby work through problems together, heads bent close, giggling at inside jokes. And slowly, painfully, Catherine learned what she'd been missing. Being present. Really present. She restructured her work schedule, left the office at 5:30 instead of 9, had dinner with Harper 5 nights a week, real dinners, where they talked about their days, about Harper's friends, about the book Harper was reading. She'd learned Harper loved lavender because it reminded her of her grandmother's garden. Learned Harper wanted to be a scientist. Learned Harper had felt invisible in her own home for years. Each revelation was a knife to Catherine's heart. But she didn't look away. She'd done this, and she would fix it. One evening, 6 weeks after the press conference, Catherine and Harper arrived at Garrett's apartment for a planned dinner. Ruby had invited them. A thank you for the foundation. The apartment was still small, still worn, but it smelled like home-cooked pasta and garlic bread. Garrett had clearly tried, setting the table with mismatched dishes and a grocery store bouquet in a mason jar. It was humble. It was perfect. Over dinner, Ruby chatted about her day while Harper listened with rapt attention. Garrett and Catherine talked about the foundation's expansion plans, about curriculum development, about the 50 applications they'd received for 20 available slots. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by the girls' laughter. And Catherine realized, with a start, that she was happy. Not successful CEO happy, not closed a deal happy. Just happy. Present. Real. After dinner, the girls ran off to Ruby's small bedroom to play. Catherine helped Garrett clear the table, their movements comfortable in the tight kitchen. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine said as she dried a plate. "How did you do it? Survive 3 years of watching your work build someone else's empire? Cleaning floors in the building where your stolen research made millions? How did you not break?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, his hands still in the soapy water. "I did break," he said finally. "I broke every single night, but then I'd go home, and Ruby would be sleeping, and I'd remember she's the reason I'm alive. Not the work, not the recognition. Her. As long as I could be there when she woke up, take her to school, help with homework, tuck her in. I could survive anything else." He pulled his hands from the water, dried them on a towel. "Diana told me once that I loved equations more than her. I proved her right, but she also told me it wasn't too late to change. So I did. Even if it took losing everything to learn how." Catherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Harper told me last week that she'd wished on every birthday candle for 3 years that I'd spend more time with her. 3 years of wishes, and I never knew." She wiped her eyes. "I'm trying, Garrett. Trying to be the mother she deserves. But I keep messing up. Keep falling back into old habits. How do you stay consistent?"